So the first thing I want to do is actually share two quotes by a guy called Hunter Post. So the first of the quotes that really resonates with me is that the biggest thing holding you back is almost always you. Start there. And he follows that up with a quote that says, when you get stronger, everything in the world gets easier. Change yourself and you change everything. And the reason that that resonates with me is that I think most of us spend a lot of our time thinking, well, if I can change my external circumstances, if I can get that new job, if I can get away from that manager, if I can get that pay rise, then everything will fall into place. But the reality is you're moving away from one boss. You're going to have another boss at some point in your life that you find a challenge. So let's work on the things that we can control. I can't control other people. I can't control other people's behaviors, but I can control me and how I interact with those people and how I think about those circumstances. So the biggest thing that holds us back from being as confident as we would like to be is the inner critic. And you've probably heard it talked about as imposterism, imposter syndrome, inner critic. They're all slightly different, but for the purposes of today, we're going to sort of consolidate them into one, because the impact is the same. When our inner critic is showing up, it limits how we're going to show up in the world. And if we think about it, how it tends to show up, and the reason this sounds quite doom and gloom, by the way, when you spend a lot of time talking about how the inner critic shows up. But the reason I want to share this with you is if you're not aware of it and you're not able to label it, it's very hard to actually move forward from it. So some of the ways, and these are not all, but some of the ways it shows up is feeling you're not enough. I know Fiona talked earlier about I'm not smart enough, I'm not X enough, whatever it might be. We also tend to hyper-focus on our shortcomings. So I'd love to know if anybody here sort of resonates with that idea of we pay very little attention to the things we're good at and the value we bring in our current jobs or to an organization, but we hyper-focus on the things that we think are gaps, the things we think we are not good at. We also, and that plays into comparison or comparisonitis, as it's sometimes called. And that old saying that comparison is the thief of joy really resonates for a lot of people, because think of it, you have an achievement and you're very proud of it until you realize that maybe somebody else has achieved something a little bit more than you. And all of a sudden, all the joy you had about your achievement has gone out the window. We also, if you're very reliant on other people's opinions, that might be a sign that your inner critic is showing up. So you're at work or in your personal life and you have some great idea and you're super excited about it and you share it with somebody and they go, oh, don't think that's a good idea. Oh, that sounds a bit risky. But they basically rain on your parade. And all of a sudden, that's what your attention goes to. You sort of lose track of how excited and passionate and enthusiastic you were with your idea, and now you're overly reliant on their idea. Hands up anybody who would like to think they're a bit of a perfectionist or maybe have some what I would call toxic expectations of themselves. I see quite a few little hands going up. Perfectionism is really a defense mechanism, right? We have this logic, and it's incorrect logic, but logic that if I am perfect, then everything else will go to plan. People won't judge me, or at least they won't judge me negatively. I'll build these relationships. Problem is, perfectionism is unattainable. It doesn't exist. But what we do have is these toxic expectations that are just unrealistic. So you go into work tomorrow, you have 26 things on your to-do list, and at the end of the day, you beat yourself up that you didn't do all 26. Now, was the expectation that you could ever do the 26 the problem, or was the actual ability to do them the problem? We assume it's our ability. I wasn't productive enough. I wasn't focused enough. Tomorrow will be different. And that often leads us to the all or nothing approach, right? Because the all or nothing approach is, think of New Year's resolutions. I'm going to set myself this ridiculous New Year's resolution. I've never been to the gym, but I'm going to go 7 days a week starting January 1st, and I'm going to do it for 365 days. And then somewhere in the middle of that, life happens, as it always does, and you go 3 days one week. And you go, well, that's not good enough, so I quit. I'm out. So one extreme is the all, the other extreme is the nothing. And then finally, what you do need to know about this is your inner critic is there to protect you. It's a defense mechanism. I have all these fears of people judging me, finding me lacking, finding me not good enough. So my inner critic is going to try and protect me. But it's not really, right? Or maybe it did at a point in your life, but it's no longer protecting you. And what you need to know, basically, is a lot of clients will come to me and say, I need to stop feeling like an imposter. I want to stop feeling my inner critic. And what I have to share with them is your inner critic is a symptom. It's not the root cause. So it'd be like you going to a dentist and saying, I've got a toothache. And they're like, well, here's some Panadol, you're fine, go home. I'm masking the symptom, but we're not getting to the root cause. The root cause is actually your beliefs. Because what happens is you have a belief, like maybe your belief is, I'm not as smart as other people in my work environment. That leads to a thought, and the thought is, I'm at my team meeting, and do you know what, everybody here is smarter than me, so I'm not going to share my idea, or I'm not going to ask that question because everybody will think I'm stupid, right? So the inner critic is like, I'm protecting you from people thinking you're not smart. Which leads to an action, which generally is, I'm going to stay quiet. I'm going to sit in the corner and sort of be small and not raise my voice. The problem with that is the result tends to lead to something like, maybe you don't get promoted, right? Because nobody in that room knows why you're not willing to share your opinion. They just know you don't have ideas or you don't have opinions, but they don't know why. The result then reinforces the belief I have. So maybe you don't get that promotion. And then you think it's because I'm not smart enough. And actually your smarts have absolutely nothing to do with why you didn't get that promotion. It's that belief that started it. And the reason this is so powerful, I spent 20 odd years working in banking. And anybody who knows the financial services industry knows we all love to tell ourselves we are the most logical, rational, data-driven group of people in the world. And it's a bunch of lies. Because, as you can see here, think of your mind like an iceberg. And only about 10% of the iceberg is visible above the waterline. That's your conscious mind. So that is where your logical sort of thought process sits. The problem is that 90% of the iceberg sits below the waterline. It's in your subconscious brain. And if you can see, I know it's in small print, but everything that lives in there is your beliefs, your emotions, your habits, your values, your long-term memory. So think of how much impact that's having on your day-to-day life, the decisions you make, the thoughts you have, the way you talk to and about yourself. You think it's driven by the conscious, and it's not. So think about your conscious mind as I drove here today. So I was probably a 3-hour drive. In that, my subconscious mind is like the radio going in the background. After about 10 minutes, it's happening, but I'm not really listening. That's your conscious mind all day. It's going on in the background, whether or not you're paying attention to it. So, how do we, with all that doom and gloom of like how impactful the inner critic is, how do we start to think differently about it? How do we quieten it? And the reason I say quieten it is impossible to totally silence your inner critic. It is a part of being a human being. But we can sort of bring the volume down a little bit, or at least have it not show up so often or as loud. And the first myth that I want to debunk is about what people think confidence is. So when you're in a place of lacking confidence or feeling like your inner critic is really loud, you think confident people just think they're amazing all the time. They never have self-doubt. They show up totally comfortably. And that's not true. True confidence comes from knowing I'm amazing, but I'm a flawed human being, as is every other person. True confidence comes from I'm going to make mistakes. Things are going to go wrong. I'm going to end up embarrassed. And that's life. And the problem with confidence is you go in thinking, I'm meant to succeed at everything. I'm never meant to make a mistake. I'm never meant to do something stupid. And then you fail to meet that expectation. The reality is You are always going to, and I put it in inverted commas, fail at something. You are always going to make a mistake. You're never going to do a perfect job, and that's fine. So sort of change how you start thinking about confidence. Also change about when you see somebody else who's confident, you make assumptions about that individual. You go, well, they've got no inner critic. They've got no self-doubt. And you have no idea what's going on in that person's head. I always love to think about it like that meme where there's a duck gracefully floating across the water, and that's what everybody else sees. Underneath, they're paddling like mad just to stay afloat. That is most people who you perceive to be confident. They're paddling like mad. They're just willing to still do the thing. And they're projecting confidence whether or not they're feeling it in the moment. So, the first thing we need to do when we're tackling the inner critic, imposterism, imposter syndrome, is changing your mindset. Now, mindset is one of those big, all-encompassing words that means so many things to so many different people. But what we mean in this sort of context is your mindset basically decides whether you have a positive or a negative day. So you wake up this morning, maybe you wake up feeling demotivated. That's a feeling, right? That's an emotion. What you choose to do with that emotion decides what mindset you're in, positive or negative. If I let that emotion drive every decision I make today, then I am in a negative frame of mind or a negative mindset. However, if I flip that and I go, okay, well, I'm feeling demotivated, that doesn't mean I'm not going to do things. I can still choose to take action even in a demotivated state. Or I feel insecure. I can still choose to show up to do the thing that's outside of my comfort zone. So some of the ways that you can practice this is firstly is awareness. Most people are not aware when their inner critic is going mad. It's just so regular to us that it shows up all the time. So you have to bring awareness, whether that's in the moment or creating some time to sort of reflect later on in the day of going, oh, what happened today? What was I feeling? How did I show up? Where might my inner critic have been really sort of loud and bringing me down or stopping me taking action? Awareness is, by the way, without this step, none of the other stuff happens, right? It just can't. The other thing is you need to separate fact from fiction. And we are all, as you can see, great storytellers. So, for example, I go into work tomorrow morning. My boss is really grumpy. Can anybody resonate with, my boss is grumpy and didn't say good morning, to, well, it has to be about me, I screwed up. And if you're in catastrophizing mode, by the way, you get to, I'm getting fired today. All in about 30 seconds, right? And I say that humorously, but I think everybody here has probably had one of those days where one tiny thing becomes this catastrophe. The only fact I have there is that my boss is grumpy. Nothing else. Everything else is a story I created and is a fictional story. So how do I, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the questions you can ask yourself in that, but stop creating the story. Second thing is, we all create the story about ourselves. We believe we're the center of everybody else's universe. And I hate to break it to you, but you rarely ever are the center of anybody else's universe. Chances are, 9 times out of 10, if my boss is in a bad mood, it has zero to do with me. It is quite egotistical, actually, of me to center it about me and assume that everybody else's mood at work today has got anything to do with me. So how do I potentially find out, right? I can ask my boss. Now, I may not walk up to him and say, hey, you seem a little bit of a grump today, what's going on? But I can go up and say, hey, you seem a little bit off today. Is everything okay? 9 times out of 10, the answer I'll get is, kids didn't sleep last night, got stuck in traffic, and I missed my first meeting. Like, it's rarely about us. Which leads me to creating a better story, right? If you get to write the story and create the story, why does it have to be a negative story always? Why do we never create positive stories about, this has absolutely nothing to do with me? Maybe actually he's grumpy because he's getting fired and I'm getting his job. I don't want that to be the case, but I'm just saying we never create the positive version. So if you're going to create a negative story, make sure there's at least a counterbalance of a positive story as well. Now, One of the things that I've noticed for myself before I was aware of this, and a lot of people I work with, is we go into a spiral as well. I call it going down the rabbit hole. So something happens that triggers my inner critic, I'm straight down. And by the way, I could stay down that rabbit hole for an hour, a day, a week, a month. Most of you will resonate with some period in your life where you just feel like you've berated yourself for weeks on end from the moment you've got up to the moment you've gone to bed. These are some questions that I ask myself in the moment to help stop that spiral immediately. So the first question is, are these factual, or are these my interpretation of the situation? Right, so back to that boss situation, I don't have any fact other than he seems in a bit of an off mood. Everything else is my interpretation. What is the evidence for and against my thinking? Okay, I've worked for this person for 2-3 years. We have a pretty good relationship. They're normally pretty direct. So I've got a lot of evidence that says chances are my interpretation's wrong. But I still tend to ignore that evidence. So stop and pay attention to what evidence might make me think that that's not true. How can I find out if my thoughts are true, right? I can actually ask the question, whether that's in that situation or another. Is the situation as bad as I'm making it out to be? Rarely, right? How many people can resonate with losing nights of sleep on something that never actually even happens? You just create a fear about something that might happen in the future. And we put a lot of energy into planning on how we're going to deal with it. And we think that by planning how we're going to deal with it, we're preparing ourselves. But actually what we're doing is we're either preparing for something that never happens, or we're putting ourselves through it twice. Because your brain doesn't know that one is imagined and one is real. It's going to feel the same emotions on real and imagined. And then finally, as I said, flip it. If I were being positive, what could I be thinking in this situation? The other piece I want you to be, as we're doing the self-awareness piece, is changing the language. So research shows we have anywhere from 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Most happening in your subconscious. That's a lot of thoughts in a day. And what it also shows is that about 80% of those thoughts are repeated on a daily basis. So if you get up in the morning and the first thing you tell yourself is, I'm not good enough, I don't look good enough, whatever it might be, chances are you had that thought yesterday, the day before, and you'll have it tomorrow. What's the impact of that negative thought over the course of years and years? When we talk to ourselves, as I said, our brain doesn't know fact versus fiction. So how are you talking about yourself? We generally talk about ourselves and to ourselves in a way that we would never do to somebody else. So say you make a minor mistake at work. We've all done it. You send the email and you forget to send the attachment. And afterwards you're like, oh, I'm so stupid. If a friend or a colleague came up to you and you said that they made that mistake, how you would talk to them is totally different to how you talk to yourself. You would never say to them, well, you're stupid. That's why you made that mistake, right? So we need to practice, how badly do I talk to myself? Am I my own worst enemy talking to myself that way? And could I practice talking to myself the way I talk to other people? The kindness and compassion I'm willing to give to everybody else here. How could I practice that kindness and compassion with myself? How could I tell myself, that's not a big deal. Just send a follow-up email and put the attachment in there. The language going on in your subconscious is massively impacting not just whether you get a job or not, but your experience of doing so. Are you in a positive frame of mind? Are you enthusiastic? Or are you feeling miserable the whole time? So, a couple of more tips on changing your mindset. There was a few hands that went up when I said about toxic expectations. First tip, change your expectations. It may feel really difficult to do if you are a lifelong perfectionist, because you think that by setting these insane goals or expectations of yourself, that's what's driving you. Without that insane expectation, I'm not going to be motivated to go after these goals. That's not the reality. The reality is, if I can bring my goals down, still outside my comfort zone, still a stretch, but achievable, then I'm going to actually get into the habit of practicing success. And I'm going to be able to celebrate those successes along the way. The other thing I want you to all practice is finding your inner champion. So we seem to be really comfortable going, yeah, I have an inner critic and they tell me all day long how bad I am. Your inner champion, think of it as your internal cheerleader for yourself. So that stuff you're doing for other people when they're feeling low and you're talking them up and you're helping them build their confidence, that's what your inner champion needs to be doing. If that's a new practice, you may actually have to practice writing things down. Like spending a couple of minutes a day going, what did I achieve today? What did I do well today? What are the things that I know I'm good at? Could be, I'm a great friend. I'm really supportive. I really listen to other people. But whenever then your inner critic shows up, have that list to hand that you can actually go back and look at and remind yourself, oh, hold up. If I'm going to quieten my inner critic, I want to amplify my inner champion. They should replace that noise going on in the background as much as possible. And then finally, embracing failure. And as you can see, I've put failure in commas because failure to me is I have no options left. I'm done. There is no choice. Most of us, say you apply for a new job and you don't get it. We put that in there as failure. We assume that's a failure, right? And that's the label we put on that. That's not a failure. That's a challenge. That's a bump in the road. That's whatever you want to call it. But if you can flip your mindset to, I'm disappointed, of course I'm allowed to be disappointed and work through that emotion, but what can I take from this? What can I learn from this? What can I use from this in the future? That's a much more empowering frame of mind than this is a failure and I'm just going to berate myself on, I told you so, I wasn't whatever enough. I knew before I went in. With that mindset, I'm not going to apply for the next job, right? Because I don't want to go through failure again. I don't want to feel rejection again. Versus, hey, I learned to load from that interview process. I'm going to approach this differently in the future. Empowers me to apply for jobs in the future. Okay, to wrap up, a couple of challenges that you will face as you tackle your inner critic, and I want you to know about them so as you can be aware before they even show up. So the first thing is your inner critic is probably in a habitual state of mind. A happens, you respond by B. So if your alarm went this morning, you are one of two people. You are the person who has a habit of getting straight out of bed, or you're the person who has a habit of hitting snooze. Doesn't matter which it is, it's a habitual response. Your brain is the same. In a setting, I do X, I respond by doing Y, the inner critic. So the fact that it's a habit means it sits in the subconscious. So that's part of the hardest challenge to break here. You also believe that every thought you have is true. And it's not. Your brain lies to you or creates these incorrect assumptions or perceptions or stories every single day. So you need to, instead of just assuming my brain's telling me the truth and therefore I'm not questioning it, you get curious. Is that actually true? Am I whatever my inner critic has just told me? Or if my inner critic says, you can't apply for that job, you're not qualified enough, don't just take it at face value. Question it. Is that true? Is that me just having a fear about rejection or being really uncomfortable, therefore I'm not going to apply for it? Remember, it makes you feel safe. So sometimes that fear of getting unsafe, but it's not actually keeping you safe, by the way. It feels like it is. It's actually keeping you stuck. Whether that's, you're just coming out of university and you're looking for a new job. Whether that's, hey, I want to make a bold career change, but all the fears are there, and this is where the inner critic keeps me stuck. It's a new skill. So like any other, it does not happen overnight. I'm a big disbeliever in the statement that practice makes perfect. Practice makes better. But this is a skill you have to practice, and if you're not going to do that, then you're not going to get the benefits at the end of the day. But I cannot overtell you how amazing the benefits are about working on this, because it's not just about what you achieve and whether you get the job or you don't get the job. It's about your experience while doing that. It's your experience while living life. Do I want to live my life in a state of positivity and enthusiasm and, hey, I'm willing to be uncomfortable because I don't fear failure? Or do I want to live my life feeling small and miserable and beating myself up all the time? 2 final tips is name it. You can actually put a name to your inner critic and have a conversation with it. So when your inner critic shows up, mine's Hilda, when Hilda shows up and tells me, you cannot put your hand up to do that thing, or you're not good enough, you can have a conversation that says, I hear you. I know you're trying to protect me, and I know you're worried that I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to mess up and people will judge me badly. But I don't need that right now. And think of it, I have a 3-year-old niece. And as far as she is concerned, there is zero inner critic. She is God's gift to the human race. Everything she says, does, thinks, and tells me to do, she's my mini dictator, she has no doubt. So somewhere along life, we get told to doubt ourselves. We get taught to doubt ourselves. This is about you unlearning that behavior and saying, I can doubt myself and still do the uncomfortable things. I can put myself out there. So I'm going to stop there. I know I'm probably running close on